Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. Before I get into the timeline, I'd like to point out that this is a very serious situation. I'm going to talk about some very serious things. There's a lot of people who are generational Satanists, believe it or not, not just rock and roll, not just the various groups that come to mind, okay, but basically almost everybody. Now, I'm a very unique person in that my family has been able and blessed and able to connect to God, my patriarchal line, for who knows how many thousands of years. So I'm very different from other people. Now, I'm not here to bash your families, I'm the type of guy that gets along with everyone. Can't stress that enough in this video. This is not about, bragging. This is just explaining the situation, okay? So again, I come from above because my family for generations through its patriarchal line, and the man is the head of the household, so on and so forth, okay, connected to God through the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. And it's a bit more complicated what that order is and why God set it apart to rule over all mankind. But we'll just leave it there for now as we get into the timeline. I want you to understand this, if for nothing else. When you see what's going on in prison, it is like what is going on the outside. The crime and the chaos on the outside is perhaps even more organized than the crime and the violence and the horrible things that go on inside a prison. Society, to a large degree, turns a blind eye to the horrors outside of prison like they do inside a prison. It's kind of creepy, isn't it? Why don't they help people out inside a prison? They know there's all kinds of horrible things. Why don't they structure it differently? Why didn't they do something? Why didn't they pass a war on poverty plan? Why didn't they stop the madness? We're going to answer that question in this video. You see, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the various horror ideas, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Leatherface, and what have you, Hellraiser, these ideas are actually based on ideas that existed before colonialism, but certainly are fairly well documented through colonialism. We see the evidence there, at least. We see the pictures by the lynchings and the African American people who unfortunately were hung. We see the stories, and they're believable. I mean, I'm sure they're not making up the Native American genocide, okay? These people were raping and killing like sheer animals. And when the smoke cleared, and it still hasn't cleared all the way, so to speak, at that point of it clearing, lots of people were dead and raped and assimilated. Okay, that is like a horror movie. That is a very serious thing. I can't in good conscience pretend that that doesn't affect the future of humanity and the judgments of people. I'm sure you can all understand that. Horrible things. Men, women, and children defiled, tortured, brutalized. Barbaric acts. Unspeakably evil acts. So let's look at the timeline. Let's discuss this. Okay, so just 10 years after Samuel Cartwright coins the term and defines the mental illness, the so-called mental illness, drapetomania, in 1861 to 1865, there's a civil war. Some of you might be asking, why did you bring up, about 60 years before the Civil War ends, that Johann Christian Rehl had coined the term psychiatry? Because it has to do with mind control. And not in some fancy conspiracy theory way, but in a straightforward textbook. You see in the popular science, the mysteries of mind control, straightforward, peer-reviewed, unavoidable, factual way. That for decades before the Civil War ended and the slaves were free, they had been working on psychology and psychiatry together. That is no small connection there. That definitively shows you a concerted effort to control the minds of people in a way that is pure evil. You say, well, how do you know it's pure evil? Well, let's continue the timeline. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. It was a struggle for power, the Civil War, first and foremost. Right? The South wanted to secede from the Union. There was economic issues at play, sexual issues, political, social. Those issues related to exerting power over people, sexual power over people. Lincoln is killed. In 1865, also the first Klan formed. Nathan Bedford Forrest and his goons. It only lasts until 1871. Now, this part's key. The first Klan was only from 1865 to 1871. You say, well, where were they? What were they doing? They were in other fraternities, because during this time was the golden age of fraternity, the end of the 1800s, and the beginning, the first 25 years or so of the 1900s. What is called the golden age of fraternities. In 1870, 1 year before the Klan ends, you see Jim Crow. So what was the Klan there for? They were there to conserve and preserve and maintain the satanic social orders of the colonists and their allies abroad, in England and France and Spain, wherever their allies might be, in their kind of global enterprise. Heartbreaking, isn't it? Heartbreaking. You say, well, why didn't they stop? The reason why they didn't stop is something a lot of you don't want to admit. It's because they are satanic. They are criminally insane. It's like that part in Training Day. He said, your team? You people are fucking insane. And there was white people there, and there was a black guy there. You can't trust anybody. You can only trust me. Then when you get the spirit of sound judgment, if you decide to trust me, then you can see better what is going on and why you were right to trust me. We'll get to that in other videos. Let's stick to the timeline here. In 1883, a year that will live forever in infamy in the spiritual realm, and hopefully on this planet as well, Francis Galton, an Englishman in England, coined the term eugenics. Remember, Nathan Bedford Forrest was of English descent. And they talk about the Rothschilds and the Battle of Waterloo and all that stuff. They talk about 1815 and so on and so forth, and Napoleon and so on and so forth. There's a lot of stuff I didn't put on this timeline, because I'd go on and on and on and on. I'm trying to give you some of the most pertinent facts and keep it brief. Probably have to make this 2 parts. Eugenics is about scientific racism. What has been called social Darwinism is a key part of eugenics. Francis Galton described it as using the agencies and institutions under social control to either improve or impair the racial qualities of groups, because they were trying to social engineer to make it so that the English and the German seem superior. Now, the English and the Germans, what most people don't understand, they have common ancestors with the Jews. Later on in history, this will spark a rivalry between the whites and the Jews, and World War II would really, throw fuel on the fire. That's what's going on today, where there's Jews, LGBT, and whites and token minorities doing eugenics in mega corporations, corporate partnerships, transnational corporations, conglomerates. It is unfair. I want it to stop. There's no words for how serious this is. There's no words for how much this is going to affect everyone living right now and any offspring they might have. Luke 23, blessed are the childless women, the breasts that never nursed and the wombs that never bore. And then the kings of the earth will call to the hills and the mountains, fall on us, cover us, cut our torture short. Because if this is what happens when they have the Bible and the gospel is preached throughout the world. This is what happens before they have these mega machines and they've advanced chemistry and psychology and pharmacology to this degree. What happens now? What happens to the kids? When I say to you sick people doing this, what about your kids? Is this what you want for them? To help demons torture the weak, turn their backs on the crippled and the widows and the homeless. In 1913, Woodrow Wilson segregates the federal workplace. So we get to 1915 to 1918, World War I. These eugenicists lost their mind. They're killing white folk. Can you picture it? Kids crying, people getting gassed with horrible chemicals. They're given some kind of gas mask at times, but they are suffering. They are bubbling. They are hurting. These Satanists are hurting countless white folk in World War I. Can you imagine the horrors? Can you imagine the sickos who decided that that's how they're going to settle their conflicts? That's their form of population control. That's how they're going to wean out white people that they don't want around. To some degree, that's what that was about. Not necessarily one-to-one, but they like to send certain types of people off to die while they sleep with their women. Call it a fucking hunch. Do I approve of it? No. Does it make me happy? No. Does the fact that most of them are white, bring joy to my life? No. 1915 to 1944, the Second Klan. William Joseph Simmons, who was in around a dozen fraternities. The Second Klan had an estimated 6 million members. Some years back when I looked up the worldwide membership of Freemasonry, ironically, they said it was around 6 million members. But that was a few years back. And the Second Klan was back when the population of America wasn't that big. This is back in 1915 to 1944. Can you imagine all those Klansmen? All of them willing to turn a blind eye to horrendous acts. So this is the next day, and I believe I left off talking about the Second Klan, somewhere around there, 1915 and 1944. So the Second Klan ends around the time that World War II ends, depending on where you officially ended, right? So 1939 to 1944, what have you. Okay? So that's not a coincidence. Why does the first Klan line up with Jim Crow to support the obvious facts, the overwhelming evidence that America is a continuity of racism and sexual control and behind the scenes fraternity control, lobby groups, corporations, what have you? It's the continuity of that in a nation. Because that's what it is. Now some of you are like, well, everyone knows that. That's like your kids getting, molested by a child molester in the bathroom. And you're like, well, everyone knows that. Well, why don't you get off your fucking punk ass and do what's right? So obviously the answer isn't, well, everyone knows that. The answer is to rally to the one person with the heart, to insist on the truth and what should be done, what is the morally precise solution. So around the time the World War II started, Sigmund Freud dies, and he is rumored to have been gay. An argument that a lot of people don't hear. A lot of people hear the argument about people being attracted to their mother or something, which is fucking pretty strange. It shows you the kind of mentality of the fraternities. These people apparently were attracted to their mothers as kids, and they wanted Freud to say that famously. That's one thing you get from it. For example, he argues that unfulfilled sexual desire is the true root cause of the majority, if not all, mental illness. That's what he argues. Now keep in mind, Freud is rumored to be gay, right? Freud and Jung, homosexual correspondence.